Hey folks, welcome to part 2 of the astrology of 2019. We're going to be continuing to look at the major highlights, the major transits of 2019, the major configurations of energy, and the themes that we are navigating together here as a collective. So if you haven't seen part 1, I highly recommend that you go and check that out, as this video is a continuation of that, what we started in part 1. All right, so following the astrological calendar then, on January 6th, Uranus goes direct in Aries. So let's talk about what Uranus is doing in 2019. So Uranus is dipping back into Aries from November 2018 to March 2019. And I did a whole video unpacking that, Uranus tying up loose ends in Aries. So I'll link that video and in a pinned comment. I'll put it in a pinned comment so that you can have a look at that at some point. But Uranus will settle down finally into Taurus on March 6, 2019. And for a recap here, Uranus in Taurus is now bringing attention to the Taurus-ruled aspects of our lives, our existence, on an inner and outer level. So what is being brought to our attention right now is our psychological human need for safety, security, and comfort, or sense of value and worth. On the outer level, the physical earth, finances, financial resources, things like land and farming, these are all Taurus-ruled domains. So in 2019, and indeed for the next 7 years, on a psychological and psychic level, our most deeply held patterns, the patterns that give us the most stability or give us feelings of stability, our most entrenched patterns, our stable patterns, are up for this kind of Uranian disruption, dislocation, and disturbance. And it's happening on the personal and collective levels. So Taurus is not just an earth sign, but it's what we call in astrology, of course you guys watching this would know, it's a fixed sign. And fixed signs have to do with the establishment of a pattern, stabilizing it, anchoring it, maintaining it. So Uranus, by its very nature as a planet, is antithetical to or very different from the energy of a fixed sign. So where a fixed sign wants to establish a pattern, stabilize it, and anchor it, Uranus as a planetary energy wants to disrupt and break down and dislocate established patterns. So in 2019, with Uranus in Taurus, what is being highlighted are the first 6 degrees of the sign. So you want to look at where you have 0 to 6 degrees of Taurus in your chart, and also 0 to 6 degrees of the fixed sign. So you want to look at the planets and the points within that degree range that are going to be activated by Uranus in 2019. So the essential themes that you're going to be navigating with these parts of your chart are the evolutionary push to express your unique identity and personal genius, liberation from entrenched patterns that are not in line with your authentic identity and expression, what you have outgrown and are now ready to throw off. You need to throw these things off. Patterns within you that require destabilization, getting in touch with your need for excitement and stimulation and new methods of doing things, awakening to higher levels of perception, the need to break the mold, innovation, the need for freedom. So these are the themes that you are facing as Uranus energizes these parts of your chart, the early degrees of the fixed signs. Yeah. So Uranus will be retrograde in Taurus from August 11 until January 2020. So from August until the end of 2019, Uranus is retrograde. So it goes retrograde at 6 degrees of Taurus and traverses down to 2 degrees of the sign. Then it will go direct and pass over these points again. So again, people with placements in the early degrees of the fixed signs are really in the Uranian frying pan. So there we go. All right, so let's talk about Jupiter in 2019. So Jupiter and Neptune. So on January 9, we have the first of 3 Jupiter-Neptune squares of 2019. But essentially throughout the year, throughout 2019, Jupiter in Sagittarius is dancing in this kind of ongoing square with Neptune in Pisces. So January, though, June and September are kind of the focal points in that the aspect becomes exact in these months, but we are essentially in the band of Jupiter-Neptune energy throughout 2019. So the first exact square, like we said, takes place on January 9. The second exact square is on June 16, and the third September 28. So January, June, September. Now, of course, I did a whole video on dedicated to unpacking Jupiter in Sagittarius and the Jupiter-Neptune squares of 2019. So I'd suggest having a look at this to have a more in-depth appreciation of the nature of the energy and the unique challenge that the Jupiter-Neptune squares introduces into the collective consciousness. And remember now that we are dealing with planets in their home signs, Jupiter in Sagittarius, Neptune in Pisces. So we're dealing with the purest expressions of these energies. And of course, using traditional rulership, the relationship is quite tight still, as Jupiter is presiding over or ruling over any planet in Pisces. So aside from the actual square, the actual relationship by square, Neptune is in Pisces is kind of doubly linked to that Jupiter in Sagittarius. So Jupiter in Sag is kind of presiding over that Neptune in Pisces. But for now, we can say that the Jupiter-Neptune squares of 2019 will bring up the tension between what is true in the Sagittarian sense of truth and what is false. So this energy will no doubt symbolically represent the challenges that we will face in discerning truth from falsehood. The challenge here with this square, with these squares, is being even more lost and confused in a sea of opinions and talking heads on TV and social media. So Jupiter will tend to amplify Neptune's fog, and Neptune will challenge Jupiter's search for truth and universal principles. So magnifying that Jupiter of illusions, deceptions, spurious claims, and speculation. So we need to really keep our wits about us in terms of those energies in 2019. More discernment is required. So this type of energy is even more amplified because we also have Neptune retrograde again this year in Pisces from June to November. Again, I did a whole video on the energy of Neptune retrograde, and that was for 2018, but check it out. It will still be relevant, and I'll link it in a comment, a pinned comment below the video. So essentially, though, Neptune retrograde in Pisces is sort of a double-edged sword. Some people will use the energy of Neptune retrograde to support and buttress the quality of their spiritual perception. Neptune is also a way of perceiving, which I like to call direct spiritual perception. So there is a reliance on the spiritual body to process and filter information. So with Neptune, you're not just relying on the mental body. So Neptune actually can be quite psychically astute. Neptune can actually be quite psychically astute. The other side is that Neptune retrograde in Pisces is an energy, though, that can strengthen states of unreality and delusion. So again, it's up to us to decide what spectrum of Neptune's potentials we would like to express. But within the collective, especially with these Jupiter-Neptune squares in January, June, September, our discernment is going to be challenged, no doubt. And that is essentially that dance is taking place throughout the entire year, but January, June, and September are focal points of the energy. All right, so on April 10, Jupiter also goes retrograde. So in 2019, we have Jupiter retrograde from April to August 11. So we have 4 months of Jupiter retrograde. So what will happen is that for a window of time, from the last bit of June 2019, the last part of June 2019, the whole of July and a bit of August, Jupiter and Neptune will actually have overlapping periods of being retrograde. So with Jupiter retrograde in Sag, from April to August, we are paying attention to where we have planets and points at 14 to 24 degrees of Sagittarius. So Jupiter will station at 24 degrees of Sag and retrograde back to 14 degrees of the sign. And then in direct motion, it will travel from 14 degrees back to 24 degrees. So you really want to pay attention to this degree range, 14 to 24 degrees of Sagittarius, not only of that sign, but also of the mutable sign. So Jupiter will be pushing you into new domains of experience. All right, so let's talk Chiron for a bit. So on February 18, 2019, Chiron re-enters Aries. So I've been talking about Chiron in bits and pieces here on the channel, and talking about the shift from Chiron in Pisces to Chiron in Aries. So Chiron takes about 50 years to travel around the zodiac. Now, the interesting thing with Chiron is that because of the unique nature of its orbit, it spends a lot more time in the signs of Pisces and Aries than in any other sign. So that's very, very interesting. So the Chiron in Pisces, Chiron in Aries dynamic brings into perspective where the collective grief gives into the anger of Aries. So where the collective pain gives way to anger, that kind of Piscean grief giving way to that Aries anger. So with Chiron in Aries, on the heels of Uranus in Aries, we have to look at where anger is the expression of a deeper wound. So Chiron in Aries is the energy of the child who acts out because they are in pain and they don't know how to face that, or they don't have the tools to deal with their pain. Yeah. So the medicine, though, of Chiron in Aries is that we develop a bit of the courage that we need in Aries fashion to directly and forthrightly confront our deeper pain. So it's even more interesting when we take a kind of historical look. So on April 4, 1968, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, we had Chiron at 0 degrees of Aries, just coming out of Pisces 2 days before. So the collective accumulated pain of Chiron in Pisces, the collective accumulated pain of the preceding years of the civil rights movement erupted into this deep anger when Dr. King was assassinated. So where the United States is concerned, it's interesting to see these themes playing themselves out again. So in the last few years with Chiron in Pisces, in relation to African Americans in that country, there has been a lot of grief and profound states of sadness with the constant deaths of African American men by agents of the state and the inability to really get justice from the legal or judicial system. So when we look at it with Chiron settling down into Aries, there's going to be profound expressions of anger in that country. People are very angry, very wounded, and very hurt. And we're going to be seeing this play out. But when we look at it from the lens of Chiron, Chiron is showing us where we are sick, where there's a kind of soul sickness. So everyone is in need of healing and restoration of their spirit, black, white, all in between. We have the trigger happy agents of the state propped up by a state mechanism that sort of indirectly encourages this. So Pluto in Capricorn, they're the shadows of the state mechanism. And folks, nobody is going to come in and heal us. We'll have to face the spiritual consequences of how we treat each other, and where with cruelty we abdicate our basic sense of humanity. So from a broader perspective, these souls, many of these African American young men who haven't really done anything wrong and who have been killed, are showing us as a collective where we are in need of healing. They show us very starkly where we need to heal, where we need to restore our humanity. We have state agents who are suffering from PTSD. Is that it? PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, I think. They are walking around looking normal, but they are tranced out. They are in their own pain. There is only so much abdication of our humanity. There's only so much inhumaneness that the soul can take before it starts to dissociate from the body. So state agents, soldiers, policemen are walking out, or walking around, I should say rather, in very tranced out states, unsure of how to reconnect and reclaim their humanity and reconnect with their spiritual essence and reconnect their spiritual soul essence to the body and the personality that they're walking around with. So people are very stressed out and tranced out. Also in the US, Chiron's passage through Pisces since 2010 has coincided with many mass shootings, and there is a profound grief in that country around this, and people are very angry and very wounded. So that's Chiron. And of course, interestingly, in the USA's chart, we find Chiron in Aries. So the United States as a collective consciousness will play out these Chiron in Aries dramas as a pathway for healing of the Aries wound. And the US must lead the way in this: violence, war, guns, bombing. This is the wound the United States must heal. Chiron in Aries in the USA natal chart. So Chiron will also be retrograde in Aries from July 8 to December 11. Those of us who are, let's say, more tuned or attuned to the collective energies, it can be hard to talk about this stuff because we really do feel it. But let's move on to talk about Mercury's retrograde periods in 2019. So we have 3 Mercury retrograde periods in 2019. Mercury is retrograde in Pisces from March 5 to March 28. In July, Mercury is retrograde in Leo from July 7 to 19. Then it dips into Cancer from July 20 to August 1. And then the third retrograde period is October 31 to November 19, when Mercury is retrograde in Scorpio. So the interesting thing about this is that, with the exception of Mercury retrograde in Leo in part of July, Mercury is retrograde in the water signs, Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio. So if we step back and look at it holistically, Mercury retrograde in water signs supports perceiving and penetrating to the emotional or energetic subtext of a thing. So Mercury retrograde in water sort of really tunes us into the internal perceptual process. So it can support being very observant, noting, paying attention to, being attuned with the subtleties of energy and of feeling. So Mercury retrograde has its gifts, folks. In other words, you can use the energy in that way. It's just where it becomes more internalized and more deepened. Yeah. All right. So let us now talk about Jupiter. So, and tying up the year as we move toward that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So, as we move toward the end of 2019, we have an important planetary ingress. Jupiter leaves its home sign of Sagittarius and enters Capricorn, where it will find, like we said, Saturn and Pluto. So when Jupiter leaves Sagittarius and enters Capricorn, it begins to move toward the Capricorn South Node. So with Jupiter by the Capricorn South Node, there is an amplification of the Capricorn South Node issues that we are facing as a collective. So these issues become, let's say, magnified. But with Jupiter in Capricorn as a collective, we're going to be really looking at a lot of the ethical issues around our institutions. So with Jupiter in Capricorn, expansion and improvement come when we take on the higher attributes of Capricorn: conscientiousness, diligence, integrity, responsibility. So perhaps after a few of the excesses of Jupiter in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Capricorn, and the fact that Jupiter is reporting to Saturn in Capricorn, this will sort of rein in the energies of Jupiter and sort of force it to be channeled in productive ways. But there is so much more to really say on this, and we will, of course, in due course, we will unpack Jupiter in Capricorn fully. So at the end of 2019, we are moving toward an exact conjunction of Saturn and Pluto. So on December 31, on New Year's Eve, 2019, Saturn is at 21 degrees of Capricorn and Pluto is at 22 degrees of Capricorn. So profound restructuring of world systems, organizations, institutions. And we can only really guess on how precisely this will play out. So we will be facing lessons about the right use of power. So Saturn-Pluto in Capricorn initiates a cycle which demands the highest integrity of those who are in power and profound consequences for the misuse of power. So we are facing the music in relation to systemic corruption and greed, the need for human society to assume their inner spiritual responsibility and reclaim their power where it has been given away. So this is what the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is initiating as it begins a new 30-year cycle. So power struggles. Old power will desperately try for things to remain the same, facing up to many of the myths and illusions that prop up the architecture of global finance. That's coming, no doubt. Austerity. But how not having things can put us in touch with our inner power to make new sets of choices for what we need as a species, confronting the shadow of repression and fear, Saturn-Pluto, the shadow of relentless ambition, decay and decline, To meet these challenges, though, Saturn-Pluto in Capricorn supports us to cultivate profound discipline and endurance, strength, fortitude, and tenacity of spirit, So with Saturn-Pluto, we also have the capacity to overcome the most demanding challenges and difficulties. So at once, Saturn-Pluto is the challenge, but it's also the energy that we need to overcome the challenges. So inner grit and resilience and resourcefulness, a profound sense of responsibility, right use of power and integrity, and restructuring of our basic priorities. So there you have it. This is the astrological overview for 2019. Wishing you every success in the year ahead, fortitude, strength, and grace as you rise to the evolutionary moment. Thanks for watching, guys, and until next time, talk soon. Bye.